When I began my Jacksonville Jaguars draft grade video, I talked about the fact that certain teams find themselves in the same situations every year, and they've ultimately earned that right to be picking in the top 5 or top 10 of the NFL draft every year because of their own stupidity and their own failures, especially when it comes to the NFL draft. Well, most certainly the Oakland Raiders definitely fit into that category. They've been a mess for years when it comes to the NFL draft. Gambling on athletes that can't freaking play, trading away first round picks for veterans when they have no business doing so, just a complete and utter mess. However, things maybe started to turn just slightly in 2014 with Khalil Mack, Derek Carr, Gabe Jackson, Justin Ellis. The Raiders, for the first time in many years, pieced together a really solid draft class. And the type of draft class that could help to slowly turn the tide and the tables in the favor of this Raiders organization in the AFC West long term, especially as the Broncos will probably eventually fade out, maybe the Chargers as well, and the Chiefs might never take that next step. So it was going to be important for this Raiders team that found themselves with another top 5 pick in the first round of 2015 to follow up on that success of 2014. They didn't necessarily have to hit a home run, but they most certainly couldn't fail and come up short. They had two primary objectives in this draft, in my opinion, heading into it. They had to get David Carr help, get David Carr more help, and then number two, build around Khalil Mack. Those are the two kind of franchise pieces that the Raiders have, if you want to call them that. It's Derek Carr on offense, and it's Khalil Mack on the defensive side of the ball. And if you want Derek Carr to be a success, then you've got to help him. And if you want Khalil Mack to become the star that he's going to be, then you've got to help him too. And the Raiders, at least in their draft philosophy, were pretty balanced. And I appreciated that approach. I don't think they went way out of bounds with too many of their picks, even though there were a couple of things that I did question about this draft. But you could tell there was definitely a priority, first and foremost, to give Derek Carr help. And that, above all else, had to be the priority of this draft. Especially if you believe that he's going to be the guy and you want him to be the guy. And it seems like Mark Davis loves him and believes that he can be that guy. Then you need to do everything possible to make sure that he does become that guy. So with the 4th overall pick and a lot of Raiders fans and a lot of people expecting them perhaps to take Leonard Williams, I think the Oakland Raiders made the right call and made the right decision by going the safe route, believe it or not. You know, we're talking about a Raiders team that if Al Davis was still alive, it's Kevin White all day long. And I thought Kevin White was the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class. So I will certainly wouldn't have faulted that pick. But I'm also not going to fault them for taking Amari Cooper. I think Amari Cooper is NFL ready right now. I think this is a guy that could potentially catch a 90 to 100 balls as a rookie, especially with Derek Carr throwing the ball and not a whole lot of else in terms of the way of help. The Raiders needed somebody solid. They needed somebody that could play, period. Similar to what they got in Khalil Mack with that 5th overall pick last year. He just stumbled into their laps. Well, there he is, Amari Cooper. They didn't sit there and take Leonard Williams, who's not going to help Derek Carr on the offensive side of the ball. They got the impact weapon outside that Derek Carr needed on that Raiders offense. That's what they needed to do, and that's what they got. And I applaud the Raiders for making the sensible choice and, in my opinion, making the right choice for them in their situation. And then you look at other portions of the draft, and they decided to get Derek Carr some more help. You draft Clive Walford in the 3rd round of Miami, a guy that I think was underrated in terms of his athleticism at the tight end position. I think he is a future NFL starter. Then you take a guard like John Feliciano in the 4th round at some point in time. I think he'll be a starter as well. And you look at the defensive side of the ball. You know, Khalil Mack's your franchise piece, so you got to build around him. They set about going after Mario Edwards Jr. in round 2, and they bring in Ben Heaney, the inside linebacker, in the 5th round. You know, I see the philosophy of what the Raiders did here. Nothing too incredibly crazy or off the wall, although there were a couple of things that I did question. In terms of the best pick, again, I think it was Amari Cooper. You know, the Raiders really, I thought, did themselves well, and I don't think they'll look back from taking Amari Cooper over Leonard Williams. I really, truly don't. Because, again, I think Leonard Williams is just a little bit overrated when it came to this draft process. I most certainly don't think that he was the number 1 prospect on the board, regardless of position, as so many people like Mayock and Kuiper and McShay might tell you. And I also most certainly don't even think that he was necessarily the best defensive player. in this draft class. I think that was Dante Fowler, and frankly, I don't think he was the best defensive line prospect in this draft. I think that honor goes to Danny Shelton. So when I look at it, I feel much more strongly about them taking an Amari Cooper than if they had taken a Leonard Williams. I love the pick for them because of what Cooper represents and a bit of a go away from the old days where they would have just been about size, speed, and athlete. There are some things I second guess, though, about this Raiders draft. I think it was an okay average draft for them. I do not think it was a great draft. A lot of that comes into the play when you look at round number 2 and the fact that they took Mario Edwards Jr. Now, here's a guy that at times flashed big-time potential and big-time upside at Florida State. This is also a guy that you talk about was just one piece to the puzzle of a team that was loaded with players that got drafted off of that defense over the past 2 years. I have serious concerns about what position he plays best at the NFL level. I think he put on some weight and didn't play that particularly well. Sometimes you question his effort. In round number 2 where they were picking, it's one thing maybe if they'd appealed back later in the round and picked up some additional picks that they could have used. I thought they reached mightily for a guy like Mario Edwards, especially when I frankly thought there were better edge rushers on the board. I also question that they didn't take a running back at any point in time in this draft. I always question when teams have a big need at a position and a particular positional class is really, really good, and then they don't take a player at that position. Why would you not roll the dice at some point in time? At some point in time, you got to at least fudge or finagle your board enough to where you can argue and justify that you need to take that guy. I'm not a big believer in need-based only drafting, but sometimes, you've got 7 rounds. It's a really good running back class. You got to dip your toes into that pool at some point in time. You would think, and if you're rolling into the season thinking Latavius Murray and Roy Halou is going to be enough to get the job done, you're probably gambling unnecessarily. Now, in terms of some picks that could surprise, I know I saw some people questioning the pick of Clive Walford, the tight end out of the U. I don't think they should be questioning it. I think he's a guy that is an NFL starter. I think he's a little more athletic and more of a playmaker than he's given credit for. Is he Jimmy Graham? No. But is he a starting NFL tight end? Yes. And another good intermediate option for a Derek Carr. Something that a young quarterback needs. He needs that safety valve, that security blanket at tight end, and Walford brings them that. And then I even look at a guy like Ben Heaney. You've got C.O. Moore on one side, you've got Khalil Mack on the other side. They're not going to play the 3-4, which I don't fully agree with. But one thing that's been a gaping void in the middle of that defense for some time is inside linebacker, is the middle linebacker position. I look at a guy like Ben Heaney, and maybe under Jack Del Rio, he could become a Puz Lesney type of guy. Who knows? Maybe he can be a starting middle linebacker. I think he could surprise some people. At worst, he's going to be a stud special teams player. When I look at this draft overall, I think Cooper was an absolute home run for the Raiders at number 4. I really do. There are other teams that I would have argued more strongly for Kevin White, but for the Raiders, I think Amari Cooper made the most sense. I think Walford and Feliciano are future starters, and that's a good thing, again, because you need to help out your young quarterback. The Edwards pick was really puzzling to me, and it's really hard to piece together the justification or strategy behind that. When you look at other players that were available in round 2, I think there were superior defensive line prospects, whether that is a guy like Preston Smith or a guy like Eddie Goldman. Who else? I could definitely say an Owa Adigizua. Those are guys I just thought were better defensive line prospects. Then you look at other positions. Why would you not roll the dice on a Dorial Green Beckham? You want Derek Carr to be successful. You've got Amari Cooper. Why not roll the dice with another big guy? If you want to focus on inside linebacker later in the draft and a guy like Ben Heaney, you want an impact player on that defense to go with Mack and C.O. Moore. Why not draft an Eric Kendricks out of UCLA? Running back is a big need. You want to help out your young quarterback. Why not dip into T.J. Yeldon a little bit? That's what really surprises me. And again, not only just that Edwards pick, but not taking a running back. That was more surprising and more puzzling to me and kind of hard to rationalize. This was a good running back class, even once you got past the so-called top 2. And they were in a position to take a guy like T.J. Yeldon, a 3-down back at the NFL level. And then in other rounds, they were in position to take guys like Duke Johnson in round 3 and even gamble maybe in a round 5 on a guy like Ajay Ajayi. And they just didn't do it. They didn't pull the trigger. And I thought that was puzzling and hard to kind of wrap my fingers around. So I think those two things, when you look at a big reach in round 2 and the fact that they didn't address running back once, I think that does hurt the Raiders' draft grade here a little bit. I don't think this class is nearly as good as their 2014 one, but I don't think this is as terrible as some of their previous draft classes over the past decade. I think it's just kind of a slightly better than average class. I'm going to give them a grade of a C+. You know, Amari Cooper, if he becomes a big-time stud at the NFL level, which is possible, probably will help elevate this grade quite a bit. But they really need Mario Edwards to validate that draft slot. Otherwise, people will be looking back and imagining what could have been, because I can guarantee you there were some players taken within the next 20 picks after Mario Edwards that are going to be a lot better than him at the NFL level.